It's strange how the smallest thing can make your heart race. How a simple, innocent detail can turn everything you know upside down. That's how it started for me. I had no idea what I was about to walk into. When I woke up that morning, everything felt normal, just another day. The sky was the usual gray, the house was quiet, and the air outside had that chill that always seems to hang in the early hours. But then I stepped outside. My door was the first thing that felt wrong. I don't know why it struck me so immediately. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe it was the way everything around me looked so untouched, almost too perfect. But as soon as I saw it, I felt a cold rush of fear. The symbols. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. After all, I hadn't had the best sleep the night before. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I might still be half dreaming. But no, there they were. Strange, jagged shapes carved into the wood of my door, like something had been etched there in a rush. There was no pattern that made sense, no meaning I could immediately grasp. Just chaos. Some looked like twisted lines, others like symbols I didn't recognize, like something ancient or forbidden. I reached out, hesitant, my hand trembling slightly as I traced one of the markings with my finger. It felt wrong. The surface was cold, but beneath my touch, it was almost alive, pulsing. Like the wood was breathing. I stepped back, my mind racing. What was this? Who had done this? And then it hit me, the terrifying thought that someone had been in my house while I slept. That I'd been oblivious to whatever they were doing. But why my door? Why these symbols? I scanned the street. No one was around. No sign of a break-in, no broken windows, no door left ajar. Everything looked untouched, except for the markings. I needed answers. I couldn't just stand there. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. It didn't make sense. Why would someone do this, and why would they leave it for me to find? I turned to go inside, but I paused. Something in the air had shifted. There was a weight now, a heaviness. The wind had stopped, and the world felt oddly still. It was the kind of stillness that makes you want to hold your breath and wait for something to happen. And then there was that sound. A faint scratching noise. It came from behind me, like nails against the ground. I spun around, but the street was still empty. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a cat. Maybe an animal rummaging around in the bushes. I didn't want to admit it, but the thought crossed my mind. The thought that there might be something else out there. Something more sinister. Shaking it off, I finally stepped inside. But the unease didn't leave me. I could feel it now, settling in my chest. I tried to go about my morning, but my mind kept drifting back to those symbols. What did they mean? Why had they been carved into my door? And who had done it? I sat down at the kitchen table, trying to distract myself with my phone. I scrolled through the news, hoping to find something that could explain what was going on. But nothing seemed to make sense. Then, a message popped up on my screen. It was a text from an unknown number. It read, "You're not alone." I froze. My thumb hovered over the screen as I tried to make sense of it. Who was this? Why were they contacting me? I felt a shiver run down my spine. My eyes darted to the window. The world outside was still, but that silence, it felt too thick, too heavy. Suddenly, I couldn't sit still anymore. The tension was unbearable. I grabbed my coat, threw on my shoes, and rushed outside. I needed to see those symbols again. I needed to make sense of them. But when I got to my door, my heart dropped. The symbols were gone. Just like that. Vanished. My door was completely normal again, as if nothing had ever been there. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, trying to figure out what had just happened. Had I imagined the whole thing? Had I been sleepwalking or hallucinating? But deep down, I knew it wasn't a dream. Something strange had happened, something I couldn't explain. and I had a feeling that whatever it wasn't over. And that's when I knew. My life wasn't going to be the same after today. I stood there in front of my door, feeling a mix of confusion and fear. My mind kept racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The symbols, how could they disappear so quickly? It was as if they were never even there. But I knew what I had seen. I wasn't imagining it. I shook my head and walked back inside, locking the door behind me. My hands were trembling. What was going on? I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just stressed. Maybe I had been sleep deprived. But something inside me refused to believe that. As I turned to sit back down, my phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, the text was more direct. You don't understand yet, but you will. I felt a cold shiver race down my spine. It was the same number as before. Who was sending me these messages? And why did they seem to know exactly what I was going through? Before I could think any further, my doorbell rang. I froze. No one ever came to my door, especially not this early. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I slowly made my way to the door. My hand hovered over the handle, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. I felt like something, or someone, was on the other side, waiting. I took a deep breath and slowly pulled the door open, my heart pounding in my chest. Standing in front of me was a man in a long, dark coat. He looked out of place. His eyes were sharp, but there was something strange about them. Almost too calm for someone who had just shown up at my doorstep. "Are you all right?" he asked in a low voice. His gaze flicked to my door, then back to me. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I felt all right at all. "I'm sorry to bother you," he continued, "but you need to know something. You've seen it, haven't you? The symbols?" My mouth went dry. How did he know? "Yeah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I saw them, but they're gone now." "I don't understand." He raised a hand to stop me. "I don't have much time. You need to listen carefully. There are rules. You can't break them. If you do, it will only make things worse." I blinked, unsure of what he was talking about. "Rules? What kind of rules?" The man looked over his shoulder, as if checking for someone. He stepped closer to me, his voice growing softer but more urgent. "There are things that exist around you, things you can't see. But they're watching, always watching. The symbols were a warning, and the rules are there to protect you. At least, for now." I stepped back, my heart hammering in my chest. What was he saying? "Who are you?" I asked, trying to steady my breath. "What do you mean, rules?" He gave me a look, almost pitying. "There are 5 rules. The first one is simple. Never go outside after dark. No matter what you hear, no matter what you think is happening, do not go outside once the sun sets." I stared at him, feeling like I was caught in some kind of nightmare. "Are you serious? I can't just hide away. What's the point?" His eyes locked onto mine. "Trust me. You'll understand soon enough. And don't even think about ignoring rule number 1. It's there for your own safety." The man paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the air. "There are others who know about the symbols. They'll try to find you, try to get you to break the rules. But if you follow them, you'll be fine. At least, for now." He turned to leave, but then stopped. Without looking back, he muttered one last thing. "Rule number 2, never, ever trust your instincts." And with that, he walked away. I stood there, staring at the door, my mind spinning. What did he mean? Why did he say to not trust my instincts? Why was he even here? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I knew it wasn't over. It was just beginning. It's funny how quickly the mind can go from skepticism to fear. One minute, I was thinking I'd figured it out. The next, I was living in a nightmare I couldn't control. I stood there, staring at the door, the man's words still echoing in my head. Never go outside after dark. Don't trust your instincts? It sounded like something out of a horror movie. Something that made no sense, but I couldn't shake it. Something deep inside told me I had to follow those rules. But what was I really afraid of? I spent the next few hours pacing around the house, my nerves on edge. The day dragged on, and every time I glanced at the clock, I found myself watching the sun dip lower in the sky, as though the very act of it getting dark was some kind of countdown. I knew I wasn't supposed to go outside after dark, but there was something about the warning that kept gnawing at me. What if I just took a quick look? What if there was something out there that I needed to see? My instincts told me to stay inside, but my mind, it kept questioning everything. Maybe I was just overreacting. Maybe there was no danger. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The house was so quiet, too quiet. I kept glancing out the window, looking for anything unusual. The street was empty, just the usual flickering streetlights and a light breeze that rustled the trees. Everything seemed normal, except I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't. Around 7:30 p.m., I decided to make myself some tea, hoping it would calm my nerves. I needed something to distract myself from the weird sense of dread that seemed to hang in the air. But as I reached for the kettle, something outside caught my eye. A shadow. It wasn't like the usual shadows I'd seen before. This one was different. It was large, stretching across the pavement, and it moved unnaturally. Too fast. Too erratic. It seemed to flicker, like a glitch in the world around me. My heart skipped a beat. I leaned forward, trying to get a better look. But just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The shadow vanished, and the street returned to its usual stillness. I was breathing heavily now, my chest tight. Was it real? Had I imagined it? I shook my head. It's just your mind playing tricks, I told myself. But even as I said it, I knew it didn't feel right. I tried to distract myself by watching TV, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the strange shadow. Then, the silence in the house grew heavier, more suffocating. The air felt thick, and even the hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than usual. It was like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. Around 9 p.m., I heard a noise outside. A scratching sound, like something dragging along the ground. My heart stopped. I turned off the TV and listened. It was faint, but unmistakable. The noise was coming from the front door. It didn't make sense. The front door was locked. I hadn't gone out. No one could be outside. But there it was again, scratching like claws against wood. It was slow, deliberate, like it was testing the door, trying to get in. I stood frozen, my breath shallow, my mind racing. What was happening? Should I call someone? Should I hide? But what if the man was right? What if breaking the rules meant something worse would happen? Then the scratching stopped. I waited, barely breathing. The silence returned, but it was different now. It felt oppressive. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number, not even sure who I was calling. It was just something to do. But before I could press send, I heard something else. A voice. It was soft, almost a whisper, but it was clear. "Come outside," the voice said. My blood ran cold. I turned towards the door, instinctively stepping back as the voice came again, this time louder. "Come outside. It's safe." I could feel my legs shaking. Every instinct in my body told me to run, to hide, to stay far away from that voice. But something else told me I had to go. I tried to control my breathing, but it was useless. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel sweat running down my back. The man had said not to trust my instincts. But what if this was all part of the trap? What if everything was leading me here, to this very moment? and I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. But what if this was real? What if someone truly needed my help? I took a deep breath. I had to know. I grabbed the door handle and opened it slowly, my fingers trembling. My feet barely moved as I stepped outside, my eyes darting around the empty street. Nothing. It was completely still. The street was empty, just as it had been earlier. The only sound was the distant rustling of leaves in the trees. But as I looked down at the ground, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The symbols. The same strange, jagged shapes that had been on my door that morning were now carved into the ground in front of me. They were faint, as if they had been drawn just moments ago, yet they looked old, as if they'd been there for years. I dropped to my knees, my hands trembling as I reached down to touch the markings. But just as I did, I heard it again, the scratching noise, louder this time. It wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. And then, just as quickly as it had started, everything went quiet. Too quiet. I had broken the rules. I had stepped outside after dark. And now, it felt like something was closing in. Everything was silent. Too silent. I stood there, my heart racing in my chest, as I stared at the symbols carved into the ground. The air around me felt thick, almost suffocating. A low hum seemed to vibrate in the atmosphere, like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I looked around, trying to spot any movement, but the street was empty. The house behind me seemed like a distant memory, like I'd stepped into another world. The rustling of leaves in the trees had stopped. Even the usual sounds of the neighborhood, cars driving by, people talking, were gone. Just the silence. I felt the ground beneath my feet grow cold. As my fingers brushed against the markings, I could feel a subtle vibration. A pulse, like the symbols were alive. But that was impossible, wasn't it? I stood up quickly, backing away from the symbols, my breath coming in shallow gasps. What had I done? What had I just discovered? I heard it again. The scratching. But this time, it wasn't distant. It wasn't in the background. It was right behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. And that's when I saw it. The figure. A tall, thin shadow stood at the edge of the street, just outside the light of the street lamp. It didn't move, just stood there, like it was watching me. Its outline was blurred, as if it was more of a shadow than a person. I couldn't make out any details. No face, no clothing, nothing that could tell me who or what it was. Just the feeling of being watched. I froze. A cold rush of terror flooded my veins, and I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, to lock myself inside my house and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But my legs felt like lead, rooted to the ground. I tried to speak, but the words got stuck in my throat. The air felt so thick, like it was pushing down on me. I tried to move, but my feet wouldn't obey. The figure didn't move. It just stood there in the dark, staring. Or at least, that's what I thought it was doing. And then it spoke. The voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It felt like it was inside my mind, but also echoing from the space around me. You shouldn't have come outside. The words sent a chill through my spine. The voice was cold, distant. I wanted to ask who or what it was, but I couldn't. It was as if my body had shut down, like I wasn't in control anymore. My breathing was the only sound in the air, and it felt like the figure was getting closer, though it hadn't moved an inch. Do you understand now? The voice came again, and this time, I could feel the pressure around me tightening. It was as if the very air was closing in on me. You have broken the rules. And now, there will be consequences. I felt a wave of nausea hit me, my stomach churning. My head spun as I fought to keep my balance. What had I done? Why hadn't I listened to the man's warning? My heart raced even faster. The world around me seemed to bend and twist, like reality itself was unraveling. I turned to run back inside, but the moment my feet hit the pavement, something stopped me. It was like I was walking through thick mud, like the ground itself was holding me back, keeping me from escaping. I looked down and saw the symbols, glowing faintly now, almost pulsing like they were alive. They were everywhere, on the ground, on the walls of my house, on the sidewalk. The streets weren't empty anymore. The figures were everywhere, standing in the shadows, in the corners of my vision. I could feel them. I could hear them whispering, but their words were indistinguishable, lost in the chaos of my mind. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The air grew even colder, and I felt the pressure in my chest intensify. Something was wrong. Everything was wrong. Then, from the darkness, another voice spoke. A different voice. It was softer, kinder, but the words it spoke were just as chilling. You made the mistake of breaking the rules. Now, there's no going back. I turned, desperately trying to see who was speaking, but I couldn't find them. It was like I was surrounded by the whispers, each one getting closer, but still no one in sight. And then the ground beneath me cracked. The concrete shattered like glass, splitting open as if something was rising from below. The symbols seemed to grow larger, their jagged lines twisting in impossible ways, stretching out like arms reaching for me. The ground trembled, and I stumbled back, panic rising in my chest. I could hear the whispers more clearly now, their voices growing louder, more insistent. You are ours now. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the figure in front of me, standing tall, silent, its form shifting like smoke. And then everything collapsed into darkness. The world felt like it was closing in on me. I could barely catch my breath as I stumbled through the dark streets, the ground still cracked open beneath my feet. The symbols were everywhere now, etched into the sidewalk, glowing on the walls, even crawling up the trees like they were alive. Each step I took felt heavier, like I was walking through molasses, weighed down by something I couldn't see but could feel. I don't remember much after that. The air around me was thick, pressing against me, and I felt like I couldn't escape it. The whispers, the voices, were louder now. They were everywhere, coming from the shadows, from the cracks in the ground, from the very air I was breathing. But no matter where I turned, I couldn't see them. There was no one there. Just the feeling. That constant, suffocating pressure. You broke the rules, they said. You don't belong here anymore. I don't know how long I wandered, stumbling through the streets, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Eventually, I found myself at the door again. My house. The place I had tried to escape just hours before. I reached out to touch the door handle, my fingers shaking. The house was quiet. Too quiet. But I could feel it. It was there, inside. I had crossed some invisible line, and now there was no going back. I should have listened to the warnings. I should have stayed inside. I should have never broken the rules. I opened the door. The moment I stepped inside, the air shifted. The hum, the pulse, the vibration that had been filling the outside world, it was now inside, suffocating me from all sides. The house wasn't the same anymore. It felt wrong. Everything was just slightly off, like a reflection in a broken mirror. The walls seemed to be leaning in on me. The furniture was in the wrong places. But the worst part? The door. The symbols from the ground, they were now on my door. The same jagged lines, now glowing faintly, pulsing like they had a heartbeat of their own. I didn't know what to do. The silence pressed in on me, but I could feel them there. Watching. The shadows in the corners of the room. The whispers that were getting louder, filling my mind. My heart was racing, but there was no one to help me now. I couldn't escape. I couldn't undo what I had done. I tried to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the dark. I collapsed to my knees, my chest tightening as the world around me seemed to close in. It felt like hours, but it could have been minutes. I don't know. Time didn't make sense anymore. Everything felt like it was happening at once and not at all. And then, the door slammed shut behind me. I turned, trying to open it again, but it wouldn't budge. The pressure in the room was unbearable, and the symbols on the door, they were glowing brighter now. The whispers were louder, closer. I didn't know how much time had passed before the last thing I heard, right before everything went silent, was the same voice from outside. You belong to us now. And then, nothing.